virtual worship. We are pleased that you could join us, and we take it as a privilege that you choose to do so. Today, we are so delighted that the sunshine has come out, the weather has warmed, and it's given us a chance to reconnect with our community and God's growing green earth. It's very uplifting to our hearts to be able to be out there again and to be able to enjoy that warm weather and the sights and the smells and the sounds of spring, finally. But this week we are talking about some other things. We're talking about loss and grief and lamenting over what we are missing. And for some of you, it might be your social life or your school year or your retirement fund that you're grieving. We might be longing for our old schedule, our work week even. We might be missing hugs and simple touches. Longing for touch from another person is a very, very sad thing that we have missed so deeply right now. So how do we as Christians handle our grief and losses? And what are the benefits from the strain that grief puts on us right now? Rick says, last week's topic was happiness. This week, it's the opposite. The Bible has lots to say about the pain and sorrow surrounding death, disappointment, and daily struggles of many kinds, but we often get it so very wrong. So we'll examine some misconceptions, see how to handle sorrow effectively, and learn what we can gain from loss. And so today we start with an invitation that comes from Psalm 34 that invites us to try God, especially when times are tough. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him.
I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from every fear. Those who look on him are radiant. They'll never be ashamed. They'll never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard me and saved me from my enemy. The Son of God surrounds his saints. He will deliver them. He will deliver them. Oh, never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord. Bless the Lord. Every day and night. Never-ending praise. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord. Let us bless the Lord. We worship you, God. Every day and night. You are worthy. May our incense rise. Oh, bless the Lord. Bless the Lord. Every day and night. May our incense taste and see that the Lord is good over everything. He'll give you everything. You hear me when I call. You are my morning song. Though darkness fills the night, it cannot hide the light. Whom shall I fear? You crush the enemy underneath my feet. You are my sword and shield. Though troubles linger still, whom shall I fear? I know who goes before me. I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. My strength is in your name, for you alone can save. You will deliver me, yours is the victory. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I always by my side.
If we truly believe that God is in control, that He holds us in His hand, and that His ultimate goal is to bring us safely to heaven, then really, what do we fear in this world but a moment of pain here and there? Regardless of what they are, our troubles are all temporary. This verse from Psalm 30 is one that I've always held on to, and I hope that it can comfort you in whatever loss that you're feeling as well. Weeping may go on for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Here are some more scriptural instructions from Paul, read for us today by Donna, and then we'll worship with one of Anne's favorite songs, Majesty.
Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse.
God of heaven, living in me, gentle Savior, closest friend, strong deliverer, beginning and end. All within me falls at your throne, your majesty. I lay my all before you now. In royal robes I don't deserve. I live to serve your majesty. Earth and worship you, love eternal, faithful and true, who bought the nations, ransomed souls, brought this sinner near to your throne. All within me cries out in praise.
When we're in the depth of loss and lamenting, it's hard to see or even hope for sunshine, isn't it? But we have three things that can give us assurance. The promise of God that He is there and He will bring us through. the testimony of other Christians that they have been there and they've come through, and our own experience of God's faithfulness in our past, all of them are our blessed assurance.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, perfect delight, visions of rapture now burst on my sight. Descending, bring from above echoes of mercy, whispers of love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. All is at rest. I and my Savior am happy and blessed, watching and waiting, looking above, filled with His goodness, lost in His love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, my Savior all the day long, praising my Savior all the day long.
As we pray together, I'm going to ask you to gather your thoughts as I pray for things that I'm guessing are on your minds as well. You can simply personalize this prayer as we go. Father, we come before you, humbled by our need and blessed by your mercy. We acknowledge our losses this week. But as Herb and Jane reminded us just last week, most of us are only inconvenienced by this pandemic. Yet even here, you honor our feelings and encourage us to bring them to you. And so today we ask that you forgive our pettiness for the things that we're upset and angry about, and that you can calm our annoyances for us, Lord. Lord, for those experiencing deep loss of loved ones, of work, of human touch, of health, we ask your blessing and comfort. For those struggling with mental health and fear, we ask for courage and strength. For those in distant lands whose lives are literally torn apart, we don't even know what to ask for. But you know their hearts, Lord, and their needs. Bless them, Lord, and make us compassionate. Thank you for being with us, for guiding us, and for loving us. Thank you for your comfort in whatever grief we feel. Thank you for hearing our laments. We pray now in the name of the one who we praise and say, Amen. One of the losses that we remember this week is the loss of the physical ability to gather as a church, to encourage one another in worship, and to feel that bond as we share communion together. But this morning, the bond that we recognize best is the one of our faithful Father, who's been there for each one of us and has united us in his blood and continues to be the linchpin that holds this small church and the church worldwide together. Even when we are apart, he is our faithful one.
Faithful, so unchanging, ageless one, you're my rock of peace, Lord of all, I depend on you. I call out to you again and again. I call out to you again and again. You are my rock in times of trouble. You lift me up when I fall down. All through the storm, your love is the anchor. My hope is in you alone. Faithful, so unchanging, ageless one, you're my rock of peace, Lord of all, I depend on you, Jesus. I
Our blessing to you this week is one of great encouragement in the face of whatever loss you feel. But as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives and he will stand upon the earth at last. And after my body has decayed, yet in my body, I will see God. I will see him for myself. Yes, I will see him with my own eyes, and I am overwhelmed at the thought. God bless you this week. And here's Rick.
You probably recognize this. It is, of course, the Taj Mahal, which means crown of the palace. The white marble edifice was built in north-central India during 1643. It was made by an emperor who wanted a mausoleum for his beloved wife who died in childbirth. In today's money, it would have cost him $900 million, almost $1 billion. That's a steep price for one man's grief and loss. Whether you recognize it or not, you too are grieving for something or someone, and I'm not just talking about death here. We grieve all kinds of losses almost daily, some of them big, some of them small, but we often pay an extremely high price ourselves. Sometimes we grieve for what is, because, let's face it, there's a lot in this world to be sad about. Poverty, injustice, and unimaginable suffering of many kinds. And it's not just the world that's flawed. Sometimes we grieve for who we are, or where we are, or more accurately, who we're not and where we're not. We grieve over our sin and our self-centeredness, and we should. But sometimes we mourn what was. This grief surfaces most often when somebody we love dies or when there's a serious illness. But it also happens when we mourn the loss of youth, ability, and vitality, which is often linked to aging. Or sometimes we just feel sad and helpless over the loss of a job, a close relationship, or even things like tradition and culture, which give us our sense of security. Change always involves loss. And we also grieve for what will never be. We mourn the dreams we never achieved, whether it's a career, the kind of marriage we wanted, or even how our kids are doing and the choices they make. Simply put, grief is an inescapable part of life, and that's why we have to learn how to do it right. But we don't. And sometimes church people are the worst offenders because of what we've been taught or what we haven't been taught. So let's start with some misconceptions about grief. The most common myth, and the most dangerous, is that grief is weakness or a lack of faith. Frankly, that's nothing more than a modern, very Western cultural idea that we impose on the Bible. It's not in the book itself. It's a 21st century idea and not a first century one. And it's tied in with society's notion that mature, responsible people are in control, self-sufficient, and independent. You never show emotion because to show emotion means that you're weak, especially if you're a man. We hear it from the time we're kids. Big boys don't cry. So if you have to do it quietly, then just get back to work. And the problem is, in the church, there's even more subtle pressure to find the positive or to focus on heaven, no matter how horrendous the hurt might be. It's like taking somebody to the Grand Canyon and telling them to look up at the sky. It makes no sense. There's an awesome beauty in that gaping hole, and it's the same when there's a big chasm in our hearts. Even celebrations of life often seem like a Grand Canyon diversion where we encourage people to mask the pain and the loss they feel and just think about something else. The truth is, when we hurt, we need to explore the chasm of our soul and find a safe, sacred place where we can pour out our hearts with all the pain, disappointment, and questions that come with that.
His heart was touched, and he was deeply moved.
In the story of Lazarus, we're told twice in John 11 that Jesus was deeply moved. More than that, it says Jesus wept. It's almost certain he did the same when the authorities murdered his beloved cousin John the Baptist, and we're told he wept over Jerusalem, knowing the city would reject him and soon be destroyed by the Romans. Yes, we need to take the long view and recognize that loss and even death is not the end of the story. But worship is the response to grief, not a mask, and it's not a substitute for it. Grief and emotion are not a sign of weakness or a lack of faith. The second myth is closely related to the first, and that is, grief is private and individual. From a biblical point of view, that is just absurd. Half the 150 Psalms are about something that's gone terribly wrong. The prophets are awash with lament and complaint, especially Jonah and the book of Lamentations written by Jeremiah, not to mention Job. But here's the thing. Grieving over loss and disappointment in the Bible is a communal thing, not an individual one. In Psalm 34, the psalmist says, "I will praise the Lord at all times. I will constantly speak his praises. Let all who are helpless take heart. Come, let us tell of the Lord's greatness. Let us exalt his name together. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed." Whether it's times of famine or when lamenting their slavery, grief was a national and communal exercise in solidarity and encouragement. Like in Psalm 137, which says, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept as we remembered Zion." And now you're all thinking about Boney M instead of the psalm, but hey, you get the point. In the New Testament, Paul tells us in Romans 12, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn." In other words, we're all in this together, and we're all going to take our turn. So we need to give each other room and permission to grieve and mourn without fear, without judgment, and without subtle pressure to hurry up and get on with it. We need each other. The third myth is that there's a right way and a wrong way to mourn, and that's simply not true. Grief is highly individualistic, with some people showing lots of emotion and others showing none. So it's easy to make false assumptions about what somebody is feeling or not feeling. Some people think of grief as a set of steps or guideposts, but that's not how researchers see it today.
Okay, so many people have probably heard of the 5 stages of grief. It's been around since 1969. Here's me and some wooden posts to try and explain it. There's denial, anger, here we are, here at anger, yeah, lovely. Bargaining, that's the what ifs, the if onlys. Depression, yeah, number 4. And acceptance, finally.
I think a lot of people have a lot of those feelings, but not in the order that they say in the textbooks.
Right, so because human emotions don't really work in stages, maybe grief is a little bit more like this. Different feelings at different times for different people. That looks a little bit more like it.
In my counseling, I always tell people that grief is like a roller coaster with lots of ups and downs, or it's like a wave. You can be standing in the ocean and you're fine 1 minute, and then all of a sudden a big roller comes in out of nowhere and it knocks you to the ground. You lose your balance and your equilibrium. It scrubs you around on the bottom and then it lets you up, you're on your feet again, and everything is okay. But you know that there's another wave coming, but you don't know where it's coming from or how big it's going to be. That's grief. Myth number 4. You get over grief. No, you don't. Here's how a psychologist puts it, and everything she's about to tell you applies not just to bereavement, but to any kind of deep loss.
And everything about your life is contained within this circle. This is you. And when a bereavement happens, there isn't an area of your life that isn't affected by that grief. It touches every part of you. And what we used to think is that over time that became smaller and disappeared. But the thinking now is that actually this stays the same, but our life grows around it. And we have lots of other things that happen in our lives now, but this stays within us. And on certain times, anniversaries, birthdays, Christmases, whatever, you dip straight back into it. And then when that anniversary or whatever passes, you remember this part of your life again. I guess what I believe now is that this doesn't stay as dark and black inside us forever, and that somehow it changes shape and becomes a little bit more fuzzy, although it still remains there.
Grief is not something you can go under, around, or over. You just have to go through it. That's the way it works. And perhaps one of the most poignant and powerful ways to see that is to look in Psalm 88. The psalmist just pours out his heart. I am forgotten by you, he complains, cut off from your care. You've thrown me into the lowest pit, into the darkest depths. Oh Lord, why do you reject me? Why do you turn your face from me? You've taken away my friends and loved ones. Darkness is my closest friend. That is not just anger. That is accusation. There is blame, doubt, fear, and a sense of desertion there. And yet, when people today have those same emotions about God, well, the church tells them that they're weak, or they're immature, or maybe that their attitude is just downright sinful. And I get that. We don't want people to wallow in their grief. But there's a difference between wallowing and sitting in this solitude and this place of brokenness. We have to give people permission to take as much time as they need. So don't rush them and don't rush yourself when you're trying to make sense of what's happening in your life. God knows that. God understands. Yes, I know. We don't believe that death has the final say. We believe in resurrection. But still, don't let anyone rush you, and don't you rush other people when it comes to the crucifixion of their hopes and their dreams and their assumptions. Okay, we've talked about some myths. Now let's talk about minefields, the things that will blow up in our faces if we don't learn how to grieve properly. First, grief that's denied, delayed, or diminished will lead to a host of physical, emotional, and even spiritual problems, just like any other strong emotion that's buried and left to fester. Along with everything from anxiety, confusion, and heart attacks, unresolved grief will lead to pain, anger, withdrawal, and even depression. It can turn us away from God in bitterness and resentment and convince us that people just don't really care. We also need to understand that bad grieving leads to very superficial relationships in the church. That happens when we begin to hide our feelings. We don't want to say anything because we seem like we're the only one struggling. We feel weak, and we're worried that people will get tired of listening to us whine about our problems. And so we say nothing. And that just leaves us isolated and alone. Not only that, but it leads people to look at us and our relationships in the church and say, well, what good does that do? They're just like everybody out there. Another problem is that caring, well-intentioned Christians often say the wrong thing to people who are hurting, either because those things are not theologically sound or they're just not appropriate for the moment. Here's a list of things you should never say to someone who's deeply hurt or disappointed. It was God's will, or it was meant to be. Everything happens for a reason. Oh, time heals all wounds. It's time to move on. Or, in the case of a death, it was just their time. Don't even say, they're in a better place. Even if that's true, that's not helpful, and it seems as though you're minimizing their pain. Most of you know I was a reporter for a long time, and I cannot tell you the number of times I sat on someone's couch or at the kitchen table talking to them about the sudden death of a loved one, a lost job, or maybe even the shattering of a dream. But I learned that the best thing to do was to let people talk, to ask them questions that moved them closer into their search for meaning, and simply not to rush them. And it seems to me that ministers and ordinary Christians like you, all of us together, we need to let people talk. We need to let them tell their story and to find perspective without any kind of pressure from us. And it is a mistake to simply try to cheer them up or distract them or let them mask their pain. So here are some methods we can use to help people find comfort and consolation through effective grief. These tips are absolutely sound, both psychologically and theologically. First, be patient with yourself and with others. Don't rush through the grief process. Number 2, be realistic. Whether it's you or someone else, don't expect too much too soon. Number 3, keep life as simple as possible. If you're actively grieving, then don't complicate things. Number 4, set grief aside, at least from time to time. Don't be afraid to work, relax, and laugh amid the struggle. Number 5, get support from those who will let you grieve without judging and without telling you how to do it. Number 6, Accept that your life will be crazy for a while. Remember, there are simply no shortcuts. Number 7, have faith that healing will come. Accept your situation, but use it to grow. And number 8, find a channel for your grief. Find relief and perspective by serving other people. So we've talked about myths and minefields and some methods behind effective grief. Now let's talk about the merits of using grief in a productive way. For starters, grief makes us our most human. It forces us to go deeper into the unknown mysteries of life, and it helps us sort out how and where we find meaning. Also, grief takes us closer to God if we'll let Him near. If we push Him away in anger or bitterness, our pain will only be magnified. But if we're honest about our anger and anguish, our doubts and fears, and our need, He will be found amid the wreckage and the disappointment. We should also recognize that grief is a gateway to healing, wholeness, hope, and even personal growth. It's not the good times that make us and mature us, it's the struggles. As Paul says, we are strong when we are weak, and when we let God work through us and in us. A case in point is Bono, lead singer of U2, one of the greatest bands in rock history. A devout Christian, the Irishman says it was grief that made him dig deep and ultimately become who he is today.
My mother died at her own father's graveside. As he was being lowered into the ground, she had an aneurysm. I was 14. She left me, but she left me an artist. I began the journey, trying to fill the hole in my heart with music, with my mates, my bandmates. And finally, the only thing that can fill it is God's love. And it's a big hole, but luckily, there's a big love.
As part of that journey, Bono made a pilgrimage to Golgotha, where Jesus died.
That's where death died. And so, I don't really believe in it anymore. It has no power over me as it had when I was 14 years old.
Among other things, grief teaches us that we're not in control as much as we'd like to think we are. It reminds us that anything can be lost, so we need to set the right priorities on things that will last an eternity. And grief drives home the urgency of our need to live in the moment, because we don't know how long that comparative moment will last. Artist Olafur Eliasson recently created an art installation called Your Blind Passenger.
It's a 40-meter long tunnel full of fog. It's not dark because it's illuminated, but because it's full of fog, you can't see anything. But it turns out you are capable of navigating. You find a compass, so to speak.
The point is, that's what grief is like. It's full of fog, but illuminated by God's love, grace, and guidance. So it's possible to find your way out. And that experience leaves us stronger, wiser, and more whole and holy. So confront your loss and disappointment. Embrace your pain and sadness. But keep your balance and perspective by letting the Spirit of God fill you with hope and help. The only alternative is to keep building a daily monument to your grief, pain, and disappointment at a great personal cost that will keep you stuck in the past and unable or unwilling to move forward. And it may look good on the outside, but remember what Jesus said. Even a clean, gleaming white sepulcher is filled on the inside with bones and decay. So give your grief to God. It may be that your pain and suffering will be with you for the rest of your life, but it doesn't mean that it has to define who you are or dominate the way you live. Give your grief to God. He may, in fact, work a miracle. So, all you've got to lose is your loss. Have a great week.